Yeah, thank you very much for the organizers having invited me, and thanks to all the colleagues, particularly those in Vienna who under extremely difficult circumstances are going ahead with the event here. Events in Vienna, in France, conflict in the Caucasus will all contribute to a discussion which will be getting even more heated and even more panic-led, and I'd like to make an argument in a different direction. Maybe quickly, the Church Commission for Migrants in Europe is an umbrella organization of churches and church-related organizations, predominantly Orthodox, Protestant, and Anglican, 38 organizations in 20 countries at the moment. And we work on the whole issue of migration, integration, and related questions. I'd like to make an argument and pick up on the current discourses for challenging the narrative, less by developing a completely new one, but pointing to unheard voices and experiences. Because as an organization, which is a European umbrella organization and working on advocacy with European institutions, what we very often hear is, yeah, of course, you as churches, you believe in the good of the people, you're a bit naive, but people hate refugees and migrants. And I think what is very, very central to challenge that, first of all, to say, I would say we're rather realistic in what we're proposing, even though we're obviously value-based, but also to say your description of the reality that people hate refugees and migrants is not accurate. It may be more the published opinion than really the reality on the ground. So it's really more about visibility for what's going on. We know that the whole portrayal of migration and its consequences very, very often is one of crisis, of disaster, of things which shouldn't be happening. But if we are realistic and look on the ground, and that's what's coming from lots of our members, things with integration and living together with different cultures and religions are not easy. Nobody says that, but they're working a lot better in many places than we might assume. But of course, family living together peacefully with their neighbors is not news. Family living unpeacefully and having a conflict is news. So I think I would like to challenge our perception. I think the groundbreaking thing, of course, is 2015, the movement of asylum-seeking persons, refugees, migrants to Europe and across Europe at the time. And at least in discussions on European level, it's always seen as the ultimate disaster. 2015 shouldn't be repeating itself. And I think one of the things we need to ask is why not? A local pastor from southern Germany the other day wrote to me and saying, well, why shouldn't it repeat itself? We welcomed refugees, we integrated them, the children are going to school. I'd rather see them in our school than in the Syrian minefield. So I think we would need to challenge the perception of 2015 as a disaster. And given that most of countries were very unprepared, the achievements in integration, in harmonious living together, and also educational and labor market integration are surprisingly good. So I think that's the first thing we should pitch, to say, why was 2015 a disaster? The preparation was a disaster, but the way it panned out was a lot better than could be expected. I think we also need to be very careful when challenging perceptions. Everybody's saying, yeah, migration has moved the whole, has so much activated the political right. And that, of course, is to a certain degree true, and we should be very worried. But as we're seeing in recent months, the political and populist right doesn't need migration. COVID is just as good an excuse. You just need something people can get very, very worked up. So migration was more an excuse rather than the real reason behind something. That is a bit different in some of the countries where you had brainwashing campaigns for the government, but also here we should ask about chicken and egg situation. Did we first have a hostile environment for refugees in Hungary? Opinion polls in 2013 or 2014 would suggest no. Or do we first have a really xenophobic campaign of the government? So also here, let's be very, very clear on what was first. Local integration, however, works in many of the Visegrad 4 countries. I can give you examples of people, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland. If they're left alone and there's not politicking about it, integration can work in these countries, often a lot better than in others. But, and that's why we hear so little about it, a lot of it is very, very silent. The other day, a colleague from Hungary was telling me, well, we have a refugee. He came to our services. He's now working, and I'm not giving you detail, he's now working at the Budapest airport in a very responsible position. And I said, well, that's wonderful. Can we put it online? And the colleague said, no, we want to have similar cases, and we want to introduce people there. If we go public, political forces will close it down. So also to say, okay, what is there first? Let's be very, very clear. The discourse we have in these countries, but also countries which are experiencing migratory pressures, is often very much underpinned by saying, well, we are left alone with the social consequences of migration. So also here, are people upset about migrants and migration itself, or about the political governance of it? And very important also for a number of the Visegrad countries, there's the social science laboratory Barcamo. They've looked at social media and the way media are portraying it, did opinion polls and others. In most of the transition countries from Eastern and Central Europe, emigration is the main issue. People leaving Poland is the main issue, not people coming in. So let's be very, very clear how much of that discourse is media made and how much is different. And let's also look at facts. I would like to argue that facts alone will not convince people, but if we interact with people, if we make encounters possible, facts also need to be in the background. In the top year of the migration crisis, we had around 1 million people arriving. In the last decade, the EU alone has always given around 3 million residence permits, first residence permits to people. So refugee influx, the crisis as it was portrayed, was never the most important migratory movement to Europe. Movement within Europe, within the EU is a thing, but then also people are coming for family, for joining their family. And it's not the young men coming in boats, it's people really coming to live with family, and it's people coming for employment. Just the surprising statistics, if you ask people for 2018, what was the country given most residence permit? Everybody would say, oh, Sweden or Germany. No, it was Poland. And who did Poland give the residence permits to? To Ukrainians. And then people in Poland will tell you, yeah, but they're neighbors, which is a nice thing, because if you ask somebody 20 years ago, they were enemies. So once again, to challenge what was first there, what's the reality on the ground? And the last point I would like to mention is, and that's the country I know best, Germany. Everybody tells you, oh yeah, Merkel made the mistake and now everybody hates Germany, refugees and migrants in Germany. No. In 2017, that's the last time we had elections in Germany, there were 5.3 million voters of the extreme right party. That's, if you ask me, 5.3 million is too many. But during the same year, reliable opinion polls have shown us that 16 million Germans were during that year active in regularly supporting refugees by giving money to initiatives, by taking refugee children to school, by taking refugee families to the local office, helping them with forms. So yes, the 5 million are dramatic, but why are we hearing so much about them and not about the 16 million? So, and I think that's something I would like to say to people who are also trying to work on the counter narrative. We often have this, oh, everybody's against refugees. I think we should look more closely and more coherently. The extreme right, the populism, the ferociousness and the articulation they have are worrying, but I think we should not be fooled into believing that they represent a majority, and we should go out and challenge the majority and say, you haven't won elections except for one country, you haven't found a majority, you're making up the migration story, people care about something else. And I think any counter narrative also needs to say, okay, we care about everyone, those who arrived, those who are there, so let's talk about the real problems.